once we're, I see Mr. Hijela on the screen here.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, and so the purpose tonight is to spotlight a short list of bills that are on the first sections of the document, and recommend positions or put before you the question of taking positions on those bills. There is a longer list of bills covering a range of topics that's also included in the document. And I believe, Mr. Agila, that we also wanted to incorporate into this agenda item a discussion of budget highlights, which
Yes.
are happening fast and furious in Sacramento. So with that, maybe turn it to you, Abe.
Thank you very much. And my apologies for not being there in person. I am feeling fine, but have been testing positive for COVID for a while. So I had to do the maximum isolation time, which is over tomorrow, thankfully. Okay, let me give you hopefully
really quick. I
Yes.
just wanted to let you know, I should have said this at the beginning. So we've budgeted about 15 minutes for the presentation time. So if that could be taken into consideration so we can stay on schedule.
Absolutely.
Great.
I appreciate that. I'm going to go relatively quickly here on the budget part. The May revision, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, includes a lot of good news for us in K-12 education, the highest level of Prop 98 funding that we've ever had by quite a lot. And more importantly, it's largely the new funding is aligned with priorities that this committee and the school district have stated in the past. So a good chunk of the new money is ongoing money that will be added to the LCFF base. We calculate, we don't have final numbers from finance yet, but we calculate that it's about between 10 and 11% more on the base grants. That's money that you can use for staffing, for programs and services for students, all of the key things you do running your schools in your school district. That was our key advocacy point that we were pushing for. On top of that, we've got extra money for special education that was put in January. We had hoped to get a little bit more, but kind of understood the politics of not getting there. But we do have $500 million to increase the base rate. There, we've got a very large chunk of discretionary one-time money. And I would say that in this budget, looking forward to probably not as rapid revenue growth in out years, having one-time money that's discretionary is actually really useful. And so that's going to come out to about $1,500 per ADA. So it's a really sizable chunk of money, $8 billion. You get 3 years usually to use that. I haven't seen the trailer bill language on it, but I'm pretty sure that you'll have 3 years to utilize it. So with all of the growth and funding, that could mean that you save the lion's share of that for a couple of years out when funding might not be growing as rapidly. We got school facilities money from the general fund, so outside of Prop 98, that's very helpful. So, overall, we did really well based on these historically high revenues and growth in Prop 98. The main thing we didn't get that we really would have liked, I think we could say a couple things. A couple of the ongoing programs, for example, ELOP, they're accelerating the implementation of that program in a way that probably most districts, including San Francisco, can't really keep up with. Maybe they could have taken some of that money and give it to us as base funding, either in the LCFF or special ed. So we might push for that with a little bit with folks in the legislature to see if we might get that. And then the other really big one is we had hoped for some relief on pension costs. So from the general fund outside of Prop 98, with some of this budget surplus, it would be great if the governor could use that. It would be a one-time expenditure that actually provides benefits in outgoing years. It will take the pressure off of ongoing funding issues in the future. And so, we realize that it's going to be tough to get there by the final budget, but that's another thing we're pushing for. So all in all, I would say much of what's in the May revision is consistent with where this committee in the district has been in terms of advocacy. So we're pretty happy with it. With that, I'll stop there. If there are any questions or comments on that, we can take them. Otherwise, we can turn to the bills.
Yeah, just any clarifying questions?
Yeah, so do we have a sense of what that means for SFUSD in terms of revenue amounts sort of ongoing, the base grant increase and then the discretionary one time?
So if somebody, I don't have in front of me, I apologize, the amount you got for LCFF last year, but 10% more of that. If somebody has that handy, it's essentially 10% more than you got the prior year. Of course, there could be some ADA adjustments. Oh, I should have said also in here, something that we asked for was some protection against declining enrollment and the disruptions to ADA for this current year based on the the pandemic and disruptions at the beginning of the school year. And we also got those. I don't have the amount for you there, but on the block grant, I can tell you that it's going to be very close to $1,500 per ADA. Myung, do we know the ADA of the district right now? It's a little bit less than 50,000, right?
A couple of things, just as a general statement, commissioners, I will say that we are in the process of analyzing the impact of especially these components of the May revision, but the May revision as a whole on our projections. So that's a work in progress. And related to the one-time discretionary block grant, I would say our ADA is, I'll say our enrollment is in the high 40,000s for the current year. It was about 49,000 in the official CBED snapshot in October. And we project a modest continued decrease for next year. That will sort of remain to be seen, because that will continue to float a little bit until the official CBEDS count is taken next fall. But the bigger question is our ADA as a percentage of our total enrollment. And Abe, can I ask you, I'm sorry, we didn't flag this in our earlier discussion, but is your understanding that the discretionary block grant, when you estimate the $1,500 per ADA, is that based on the adjusted protected ADA percentage, or do you expect that to be based on pure ADA?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, finance is saying that the ADA protections and the enrollment protections apply only to the LCFF. So that would mean they don't apply to the block grant. I suspect that we are going to push back a little bit with our friends in the legislature on that, because if you think about that, that would mean those protections don't apply to special ed and lots of other programs where we think they belong. And then I mean, I would include the block grant in the programs as well. So yeah, it's an excellent question. Right now, that nearly 1,500 is based on not having the ADA protections, but that's going to be a point of advocacy for us.
So our working estimate on the magnitude of the discretionary block grant, again, this is one-time funds, is somewhere north of $60 million. And that certainly needs to be refined and validated.
Yeah.
And so that's great. So then on the LCFF base grant increase of 10 to 11%, is that expected then to continue? I mean, is the idea that would continue in out years?
Absolutely. So that's the challenge here is we've got a lot of Prop 98 growth. And, there's been a lot of discussion about what is legitimate to have as ongoing, because for precisely the reasons you say, the district wants to expect continued support for that from the state. So the answer is yes, they intend this to be ongoing funding out into the future.
One comment I would make, commissioners, about that is that we are focused, and I think in our conversations with the board this spring have been focused on what is the difference between the second interim projections, which the board adopted in March, and what may change through the May revision and then ultimately through the enacted state budget. and I would just say it's important to keep in mind that in our second interim projections, there was already a growth factor built into the LCFF based on a 5.33% cost of living adjustment. This is the statutory cost of living adjustment in LCFF going from the current year, fiscal year 21-22, into fiscal year 22-23. So I believe part of what Mr. Hagel is talking about is comparing 21-22 versus 22-23, that statewide, the total pot for LCFF will be somewhere in the order of, this is as the governor is proposing, total increase or improvement of 10 to 11%. Correct me if I'm wrong, Abe.
No, that's correct. I mean, the total increase to the LCFF funding might be a little less than that, but the impact on the base grants should be 10 to 11%. So yes.
Right.
But we've already factored in a 5%.
Yes,
is what you're saying.
That's my main point. So it's not a 10% increase over what we've been working with and projecting through March. It's that the frame of reference.
That's helpful.
Yeah, is different.
Yep.
Okay, and just one clarifying question. I did not catch when you said we did not get two things. There was one, the relief on pension costs, but I didn't miss I missed what you said for the first thing that we did not get.
I think I probably said we didn't get the extra funding on special ed that we'd been hoping to get. So we got 500 million in January. We'd hoped to push that up a little bit more, but unfortunately we weren't able to get that.
Sorry, I forgot to ask my other follow-up. Or maybe we just got distracted. So, Deputy Superintendent Lee, is that roughly 5% increase? Again, ballpark, is that, real ballpark? Just, I'm trying to figure out the scale of that for our budget.
Sorry, Commissioner, when you say 5%?
Of the LCFF base grant, that you said, roughly how much do you think that's going to increase compared to March?
Yes, and it's a really important question. My instinct is to scrub the numbers a bit further before we share that, and there are a number of complicating factors, adjustments to ADA, and our particular scoring of the provisions of the May revision. One big aspect of the May revision, which I don't think details have been made available yet, there is one simple factor is the increase of the statutory COLA going from 5.33% to I think it's 6.56%. So that is knowable. We can just take that difference and apply it to our projections of ADA. But then there's another provision that's this is the $2.1 billion statewide. That's an increase to LCFF. But is it clear yet exactly what the contours of that funding improvement will look like?
I mean, we know it's going to result in a base grant increase, but the problem is, and I agree with you that we need to scrub the numbers some more. There are a whole lot of moving parts here. I don't ever remember not being able to get a base grant adjustment number from DOF and the Department of Ed and the Legislative Analyst's Office. And it's because we're adjusting for the expansion of TK, we're adjusting for the loss of ADA based on declining enrollment. But now we have these new laws that we're talking about for ADA protection, and they just haven't done all of the math on it, unfortunately. So again, just as a rough estimate, we think rather than being at sort of 5.35%, you could call it roughly a 10% COLA and try to work your math off of that. 10 to 11%.
Okay,
I would hope to have numbers by
ready to
next
move into
week.
the bills of interest.
Okay. So on the bills of interest, you have a list in front of you. I had some bills to recommend, but I want to sort of talk about those very, very quickly because I know we're just about out of time on this item. On AB 1948, this is the Ting bill. This is a budget proposal. The bill itself isn't going to ultimately become law, but this reflects where the assembly is in terms of negotiations with the governor. It would increase the base grant amount by 15% as compared to the 10 to 11% we're talking about. It would increase the number of low-income pupils who count for supplemental and concentration grants by changing the definition of poverty level from 185% of the federal poverty level to 250%. And it would make a couple other minor changes. You know, in the interest of time, again, although I know that the bill itself will not end up becoming law, if the committee is interested in supporting the direction that Assemblymember Ting and the Assembly is taking to actually increase the base grant amount a little bit more and change the threshold for poverty, then I think we can support the bill and understand that we'll use that support to do our best to impact the final negotiations on the budget. So that was that one, AB 2598, and we can come back to these with questions and clarification before you vote if you'd like. AB 2598 on restorative justice practices. This has been a priority for this committee for the last several years, encouraging restorative justice practices. The bill would do exactly that, create a model program at the state and encourage districts to utilize those model practices. It would also create an advisory committee. So I wanted to recommend that for support. On the other ones that I had to consider for action in the interest of time, I would say maybe we hold off on those because I'm not sure we can have a full discussion of that in the next few minutes. So I think I would suggest that unless the committee wants to do otherwise or the chair wants to do otherwise, that we consider just those first two bills for positions today.
Does that sound all right to you too? Okay, that sounds good. But before we vote, I believe we do need to move to public comment. If there any member of the public would like to make a comment at this time, please do.
Chair Matamati, how long would you like for public comment each person?
Are there, I mean, I'm assuming 2 minutes each?
Yeah.
And are there any hands raised online?
We don't take public comment
Oh,
online
that's
at
right,
committees.
that's right, okay. Yeah, so yeah, go ahead, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Michelle MarquezMenegas with the Parent Advisory Council to the Board of Ed. I just wanted to appreciate the work that goes into highlighting these policies. I'm also really excited about the stuff you're not going to talk about considering for action, so look forward to that later. Just want to put in a plug, whether even if it's not going to become law, but if it influences budget decisions, that the increases in the LCFF would be absolutely amazing and would allow us to serve more of our students that that have needs, as well as I am personally very excited about the restorative justice practices to hear that there may be some standards developed in practices and also some kind of advisory committee. So yeah, just excited to see those. Thank you.
Seeing no more public comment.
All right, I will now open this up for discussion. Any additional questions?
I have a question about AB 2598, which to be just transparency looks great, and really I'm excited about the prospects of this legislation. Question about how a statewide practice, what best practice would impact specific practices that SFUSD might have, and whether it would be whether these are best practices that we can use in part or in all, or whether if we happen to have another practice that we think is more appropriate, that would give us the leeway to use those SFUSD specific practices as well.
Yeah, great question. This is the answer is that there's nothing mandatory here, and so the best practices and the model, the models that they put forward are to encourage folks to utilize them, but nothing requires you to utilize them. And sometimes, frankly, the district could be doing something that's even working better than what they come up with in terms of their best practices. So. I think the idea is to encourage folks to start utilizing them. And then just frankly, this tends to be a stepping stone. Usually you want to model some things and figure out how they're working out in the field. And then the legislature could come back perhaps in future years. And if they think they wanted to try to make it mandatory, they could. But at this point, it would not prevent the district from doing any of the things you're doing now.
Okay, if there's no further questions, then I suggest we decide whether we want to move forward. And Mr. Steele, would that just be a conversational?
This conversation, acclamation, you can thumbs up or just say yes, we support them.
So what's the sense here?
These two bills?
Yeah, on these two bills. Okay,
I
so
think,
Positive recommendation. Do you need an actual vote?
I actually
Mr.
think,
Quinn?
that given that this is agendized as an action item.
Okay.
I think you need a sort of a motion to move the recommendation and then a vote on that.
can I get a motion to move the recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Wise-Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Matamati,
Yes.
Commissioner Alexander.
Yes.
Thank you, 3 ayes.
Actually, I'm sorry, am I, Commissioner Wiseman Ward is not a member of the committee, or is my?
She is,
agenda
your agenda is inaccurate.
My agenda is accurate.
Inaccurate.
Oh, inaccurate.
Yes, so
Okay,
she
I'm
is.
sorry.
Thank you.
Right. So with that, those are passed. And thank you so much for the update. Is there anything else final that you would like to share?
I think that's it. Apologize for having to rush through all that. I'll try to get there in person and spend more time with you next time.
All right, well, thank you very much. With that, we will move on to information item, California Community Schools Partnership Program Implementation Grant. And I'm losing track of whether we take public comment now first.
We'll take it after.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Well, so what could staff move forward to present that? And as we indicated earlier, we are moving around, bringing this agenda item forward, and then we will return to the remaining 3 action items.
Good evening, Chair Matamati and Commissioners. Thank you for your continued attention to this item. I am really excited to be joined by my colleagues, Chief of Staff Ms. Jill Hogendijk and Assistant Superintendent Jason Hanan, to present this item given the cross-functional and collaborative effort to date. We will be jointly presenting on our efforts related to the California Community Schools Partnership Program. Can we move to the next slide, please? We would like to start off tonight's presentation with appreciations and recognize that this opportunity was made possible as a result of the advocacy and partnership across the SFUSD community, from our site leaders to our labor partners, our providers at school sites, to providers throughout the community, and so many others who continue to reinforce the values of student-centeredness and unity. Specifically, we would like to take this opportunity to give a shout out to our labor partners from UESF and UASF, some of whom are here with us today. Community stakeholders and educational partners, site leaders, central office staff, and to our families, thank you all so much for your partnership. Next slide, please. Today's presentation is a follow-up from the March 7 Rules Committee meeting, where we also presented background on both the community schools model and funding opportunity. Since then, the California Department of Education has released and concluded the application process for the implementation grants. We will provide an overview of the funding opportunity, review the grant application that SFUSD submitted this evening, as well as the implications and implementation considerations for our district. Next slide. And to provide a quick recap, since the Rules Committee makeup was a little bit different last time this item was heard, the California Department of Education has defined community schools as a whole child improvement strategy where the district and school work closely with teachers, students, families, and partners. The California Community Schools Partnership Program is in place as a result of the historic $3 billion investments from 2021 aimed at supporting partnerships to align community resources to improve student outcomes. Next slide, please. Centering our district mission so that every day we are providing each and every student the quality instruction and equitable support required to thrive in the 21st century. This funding opportunity allows us to take action towards our district goals of student achievement, access and equity, and accountability. We also recognize that there are existing best practices which have deep roots in many of our schools, and that this is an opportunity in service of our students and align our current practices such as the San Francisco Community Schools Toolkit and our family partnership model in an effort to establish system-wide uniform standards and measures, striving towards equitable implementation and impact. Lastly, the resources can help us operationalize our LCAP goals, including existing practices such as providing wraparound services and our coordinated care approach, to name a few. Next slide, please. As mentioned before, the implementation grants released by the California Department of Education is one of several funding opportunities throughout the California Community Schools Partnership Program. This is an overview of the various opportunities we presented on the planning grants during the March Rules Committee meeting. SFUSD was not eligible for these opportunities. We will be sharing more about the implementation grants this evening. And we also wanted to point out that there are coordination grants and regional technical assistance contracts. Next slide. I will now turn it over to Chief of Staff Ms. Jill Hogendeck, who will review the framework that the California Department of Education has put forth for the implementation grants through the application process. And in this section, we will cover funding purposes, timeline, and the funding itself.
Thank you, Hong Mei. Good evening, commissioners. Next slide, thank you. The implementation grant funding can be used to support a number of different purposes that you see outlined here. Staffing, including but not limited to community school coordinators, and could also include contractor capacity. Coordinating and providing support services to students and families at or near community schools, including through expanded learning time, before and after school programming, and during school intersessions such as summer break. Providing training and support to school district staff and partner agency personnel on integrating school-based pupil supports, social emotional well-being, trauma-informed practices, and establishing sustainable community school funding sources, designing and executing community stakeholder engagement strategies, and then ongoing data collection and program evaluation. Next slide, please. We have a timeline here for you. The application was released on March 10th, and again, want to reiterate our appreciation to our partners, site leaders, community members, and labor leaders for their commitment to the application process that occurred and completed during spring break. SFUSD submitted our application in April, and the preliminary awards were announced last week, and they were approved this morning by the State Board of Education. So funding for cohort 1 will begin in July and will extend through June 30th, 2027. We do want to emphasize that there is another opportunity for eligible schools who might be interested in the implementation grant opportunity through a round 2 application process that will be initiated by the state this fall. Next slide, please. This slide is intended to provide an overview of the implementation grant awards amount. As you can see, those award amounts will vary by school as determined by the enrollment sizes. The total grant award for SFUSD that was approved by the State Board earlier today is $33,725,000. Next slide. We had 59 SFUSD schools complete the CCSPP school grant in April. You can see here the breakdown between schools that were identified as competitive, meaning schools with at least 80% unduplicated student counts that were based on the 2018-19 school data, which was the data set used by the state. All of the SFUSD schools that submitted as part of the application process and were identified as competitive were identified as grant awardees, and those are highlighted for you in yellow here. There are 3 exceptions: Francisco Middle, Civic Center, and Sheridan. While we have not yet been able to confirm this, Assistant Superintendent Hanan did some back of the envelope calculations, and it appears that these 3 schools, while not meeting the cutoff of 80% unduplicated using the 18-19 data, they did see an increase in their unduplicated student counts using current student data, which are at or above the 80% mark. I'm now going to turn this over to Mr. Hanan, who will share some high-level information about sustainability and implementation.
Thank you, Ms. Hogendijk. So as you can imagine, a key component of any grant award is a sustainability plan. And given the current budget context within SFUSD, we will spend some time providing an overview of this component and the subsequent implications, especially as it relates to when the grant sunsets after year 5. Qualifying entities, let's back that up one. There we go, thank you. So qualifying entities, in this case SFUSD, are required to provide a local match equal to 1/3 of the total CCSPP implementation grant amount. The local match shall be contributed in cash or as services or resources of comparable value as determined by the CDE. Currently, SFUSD will match funds through in-kind services and resources, such as nurses, social workers, and Excel program staff who provide direct services to students and families at our school sites. As with our commitment and participation in the RISE SF working group, we know that there are community partners, internal and external of SFUSD, who are interested in helping us identify supports beyond the year 5 mark. We recognize that these conversations are ongoing and are monitoring their progress. Next slide, please. So there are implications to the sustainability plan in terms of long-term trade-offs at school sites. Through our internal conversations about lessons learned from past iterations of community schools work here in SFUSD, and through the RISE SF working group to interview stakeholders and review data, there is a theme that points to the need for centralized infrastructure to administer grant implementation, including providing centralized capacity towards differential supports, onboarding staff, supporting stakeholder engagement, etc. Next slide, please. On to the implementation. Next slide. So as my colleague, Ms. Hogendijk, just shared, we were awarded, the 29 schools were awarded the nearly $34 million grant. It's a truly exciting day for us here in SFUSD. So a bit about the implementation phase at this juncture. Based on the scale of supports needed, staff are working on job descriptions and finalizing the hiring process. Postings will be made available soon. Building off previous iterations of this model, we will be crafting job descriptions determining related classifications, starting with the director to manage the work and build the team. For context, central office infrastructure for support has been identified as a necessary component for successful implementation, both in talking with site leaders and staff and through the RISE SF work earlier this year. The last time we had central infrastructure to support this work was about 7 years ago. At that time, that included a director and 2 educational integration specialists who supported an incubator project of 18 schools in school year 2014-2015. The purpose of the incubator project was to begin to implement a community schools model. However, the central office funding was one-time funding, and thereafter the central office supports ended in June of 2015. Each school site will also actively engage in site-level planning processes to align program development with each school's school plan for student achievement, or SIPSA, with an eye towards differential supports that each of our diverse student communities may need to impact student outcomes. Our labor partners have hosted workshops aligned with our community schools toolkit and have expressed desire to continue that partnership to onboard staff new to community schools, including new leaders transitioning into community schools. For the state, next steps that were shared at today's state board meeting include the distribution of the grant award notification letters detailing our next steps, establishing a lead technical assistance center that will serve as a resource to districts across the state, and the CDE will also be scheduling webinars for award grantees and planning outreach for round 2 funding. Next slide. And with that, we'd like to thank you for your time today, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have related to the CCSPP grant. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this point, I'd like to open it up just for clarifying questions and then go to public comment. Yeah, we'll have a full discussion afterwards, just to, if you have any clarification questions. Okay, all right. In that case, any public comment? 2 minutes for public comment.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to take a moment to actually do a happy dance. I just really want to recognize, see, I told you I was going to do it. They did not believe me. So I actually just really wanted, it's really exciting, not just the concrete resources that are being brought to our young people and our families, but actually what this means in terms of hope. Like, it's been a really hard year, and to actually end the school year with hope for next year and the next 5 years means something. And I think it's like, you know, I've been basically doing a happy dance for like 7 days. And I think that is real. Like, that we actually have hope for our young people and families, and I'm really excited. It's been a great time to work with Jill and Jason and Melly and Devin on this to make this work happen. And I think that like the next part is the hard part, right? To make this come alive, this was the easy part, but to make it come alive is actually going to be the next step. And I think that like as Secretary of UESF, we are committed to these resources as such that I am leaving my role in MLK at the end of the school year to be full-time to actually help support the expansion and creation of community schools. And we've committed to actually, the National Education Association has offered to provide coaching that is available for us to access if we so wish. And so I'm just really excited to work together in partnership to really move this forward. And I'm going to also do the dance when we have to apply for round 2. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And that was a great reminder that we do to take a moment to celebrate. So this is really, really exciting. And it's nice to have some great news. Same goes for the earlier budget news. We hadn't really taken a moment to, say there's, good news coming and hard work to do. With that, I'll open it up to discussion. Any questions from my colleagues?
Yes, I want to, before I have a substantive question / comment, I really appreciate that you started this with appreciations. I do think like if we can ground ourselves, and Leslie, to your point, and sort of the feeling good and satisfied and happy and proud of the collective work that clearly went into this, and if we can remind ourselves about that work before jumping into the details, I think it's just a really good place to center ourselves. So thank you for starting with that. Thank you for the amazing collaborative work that clearly went into this. And I do agree, it's really nice to be talking about things that make us smile up here. So yay. So I have a question, and this sort of relates to implementation and coordination. And I wasn't surprised, and I was very pleased when I was looking at the other documents on the agenda, sort of how frequently Beacon was highlighted, and sort of the importance of the Beacon initiative and the Beacon, the programs being done through the Beacon Center. And I'm wondering about, how and to what extent you all are already thinking about what that coordination looks like, given that, hiring is going to be happening now. And it seems like if thinking about that coordination on the early end is going to, I think, make the work and the rollout that much more successful. So I was just wondering if where conversations are around that collaboration.
Thank you for the question. I'll take the first step. We are at the very beginning stages. As we shared earlier, we do not have existing infrastructure to support a specific community schools model. We have a number of bodies of work that are related, and Beacon Center is a good example. We have a bit more of an infrastructure established there in the context of having central office support, deep relationships with our city partners and agencies to run that work. And as part of the SF RISE work, which was referenced in our presentation, we did have the opportunity to hear from our Beacon partners and some of the research reports that have studied the impact of their work, which I think was helpful both to inform the SF RISE report that was submitted to the mayor and the Board of Supervisors, but also would be a helpful resource for all of us. There are lessons that we have learned from I think there are now 3 existing community school coordinators, and the work that it would take to provide that level of service. So we're definitely going to be leaning on those lessons as we work to roll that out. We also want to recognize that schools are going to be in different places. We have some schools that have deep histories with community schools work or community school type work, and we have some schools that will be brand new to this work. We also want to acknowledge that there are going to be a number of new site leaders, and so people are going to be in different places. So we do meet Jason, myself, Hong Mei, Devin Corrigan, and RPA, alongside of Leslie, who you just heard from. We've been having these little huddle meetings on a weekly basis to start to chunk out what's our next step. And so our last conversation was really about how do we start thinking about the differentiation that both schools and school communities will need alongside of the leaders, because we do want to be mindful that we have leaders who will be in different places. And I think alongside of identifying the need for central office infrastructure, the other component was that came out as an essential ingredient for a successful community schools program is leadership at the school site. So we want to make sure that our leaders feel supported in that endeavor. I don't know.
So just to follow up on the Beacon part of the question, how many of the 29 schools do we know how many have Beacon partnerships right now?
I don't have that crosswalk. I think we have about 27 Beacon schools, so some, but not all of them are probably going to align with the list there, but I don't have that number off the top of my head.
I actually did that cross-reference, and it's, I counted 12.
Okay.
Because I think it's interesting, and just knowing, like I had the opportunity to visit Francisco earlier this year and just saw how they already have many of the elements of this in place, and this will really just kind of strengthen their program whereas there may be other schools that are kind of just starting. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Thank you.
I guess another question I had was just around that, maybe following up on that too. So if there's a school that's like, you were ready to go, it seems like they probably, it sounds like from this, I'm assuming, could start hiring relatively soon if there was, yeah, is that, I guess I'm trying to understand, like because school people may be asking us also, like, what's the next step? Is that true, or is there like a longer planning period? And what is the rollout going to look like for schools, understanding that there might be some that are much slower than others?
I'll take a stab at this one. So thank you for the question. One of the current and time-sensitive to-dos is to identify the job classifications for these roles, both at sites and centrally. So that is also a conversation we're having presently, and including with our labor partners. Obviously, we want to be staffed up. I'm sure you recall, having been a site leader, summertime, people tend to go dormant, and others are really utilizing that time to plan and prepare for the school year. So that is one piece that we're wrestling with. I think another, and Jill reminded me that the money will drop July 1. And so, thinking about making sure that we are able to move forward, even if we don't currently yet have the funds in our accounts. I know that more than anything, though, it really does rest with determining job classifications and outlining the essential roles and responsibilities, because that will also inform the type of support that we can provide centrally. I hope that answers some of your questions.
Or maybe just to back up, like, will there be like a budget template for schools or something? Because I guess part of what I'm trying to determine or understand also is like, let's say again, if a school knows, okay, we want a community schools coordinator, we want to hire, then it's a question of getting the job description and moving. What if a school's just at ground zero and it's like, we don't actually know, and we need some planning time? How, you know what I mean? I guess I'm trying to understand, like, how do those rollouts happen differently?
Well, I think the short answer is they're going to have to roll out differently. And part of the requirement in the grant is that we are going to have a documented needs assessment process, which we're envisioning happening as part of the fall CCSPP revise. That's the most logical place for that to happen. We also want to recognize that there are differentiating levels of funding depending on school size. And so some of those grant sizes are really small and do not have the capacity to support a full-time person. So there's another layer there about infrastructure. Is that going to come in the form of personnel or is it not? And then recognizing that this is a 5-year grant with an expectation towards sustainability. And we currently are not in a place to say, oh yes, we know exactly where we're going to get $33 million to stay in the next 5 years. So so I guess the short answer is the CCSPP and community engagement process will be a necessary ingredient to making that determination, particularly for new schools. For schools that have a sense of how they would use it, we also have to be clear that these need to be supplemental supports in addition to what it is that they have. So we can't just switch out funding for the one for the other.
Great, that's really helpful. So, and if principals have questions, who should we refer them to?
This is the proverbial question right now because we're like, we don't have, Jason and I have been taking most of the questions. And then we call Leslie.
Send them our way.
I had a few different questions in different categories. So from what I understand, can you just walk me through how the funding stream works? Because this is a little different where SFU is than what our current, a lot of our community schools setups, especially around the beacons, where the partnership is not held within the district per se. So how do you, how are those conversations expected to move forward as far as continuing to support the relationships in place and allow for flexibility while still building out the community schools model, utilizing the state construct?
I'm not sure if
Because we're the lead agency now, we hold it, and so we have community schools coordinators now, whereas right now, my understanding is many, at least, of our community schools structures has a lead partner through the beacons.
I actually think there's a lot more fluidity to it. I mean, that's one of the lessons I learned. Carol Hill and I visited Francisco, and because this is one of the questions I was trying to understand is kind of when there's a beacon, how does it work? And I think one of the things, not to put words in Carol's mouth, but just to quote her, is that she always talks about the relationships and how it's really important that there's a tight relationship between the principal and, or if there is a community schools coordinator, that person and the beacon director, and that they have a common vision around supporting the academic and social emotional work of the school, right? So they're coming in as community partners, but if they're not closely aligned with the school staff, and if the school staff isn't closely aligned with them, it's really, really hard to do the work. So I think the effective beacons actually are really tightly coordinated. And so I'm not sure. I think for a new program, maybe, I mean, that's the challenge, but I think, I see Leslie nodding. This means I'm not saying something totally crazy. That's good. I think that for the programs that are established that have a beacon, I think this will just actually add resources that they can figure out how to use, right? It's like, oh, okay, and they probably have things that they're like, we wish we had this person and that person and this other person, right? And so I think the bigger challenge is going to be building out at schools where they don't have that kind of partnership, or they don't have the expertise, or the beacon isn't as strong, or I don't know if that's true, but
Okay, so I'm hearing it's a yes and.
Yeah, it's a yes and. So the funds are coming to us. We're going to get the award letter, right? And then we will work with school sites and other departments to see where is it that we should align these resources. But the resources are intended to serve the schools that have been identified, and we're going to have to report that way accordingly.
Okay, and so down a similar path then, how are we approaching like our relationships with DCYF and what we've learned through the SF RISE process as far as how to leverage existing infrastructure that may be serving the same children, but now there's an opportunity to help fund on-site work that would leverage what's already out there. Have we started conversations with DCYF or our city partners?
No, I mean, we have not started specific, I mean, it would be an extension of the conversations that we have had through the working group with SF RISE. There are a number of folks on that group who also stepped up to participate in supporting the grant application process. So I think it will be a continuation of that, but I can't speak specifically. Have we gathered together back as a group since the grant award was announced? No, we have not done that yet, but we have existing relationships and partnerships with those city agencies, and we're very much interested in collaborating across agency to make sure that we can maximize these dollars.
Okay, I'm super enthusiastic about hearing more about that, especially as it relates to long-term, post 5 years, which may seem like forever now, but it'll catch up with us. So I'm really thinking through how do we make this a sustainable model, unlike what happened in the example that was given 2014 to 2015. So we put in the investment now, build it out, and do our part to focus on sustaining what's working, and then are also aligning ourselves with the other resources outside of our district that are also invested in the success of these same families and students.
So there also is an effort from the Board of Supervisors to address this, which hopefully maybe will be announced soon. So I think there's some conversation around how to provide additional local funding to support this effort as well. And I think, again, the beacons are a great example of how to leverage different funding streams to bring to the schools. And I hope that we're partnering closely with them, because I think that's if we talk about that interagency collaboration, they're the experts on it. So I think it'd be great if they're at the table as well. I mean, even in terms of training and support for this community schools coordinators and so forth.
Okay, I wholeheartedly agree. And I'm super excited that we have the opportunity to embark upon this in a significant kind of way. So, and I want to also agree with you, Commissioner Weissman-Ward, as far as the clear collaboration and work that has gone into this. And so it's exciting to think that we can continue to work together for the outcomes of our students and really, really center our efforts on them. Any other comments? All right. Thank you very, very much.
Yay.
Yeah, and now you be free. And with that, we'll return to the remaining 3 action items. I don't believe, is there a presentation associated with this, or, okay, so there's not a presentation. So at this point, I would call for public comment on all 3 of these items together with a standard 2-minute limit.
Sorry, I'm here again. This is for the public comment for the other 3. Okay.
So this, yeah, the board rule and procedure and the board policy. So 9320, 9323, and 1313.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Leslie. I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody except for me as a human. I really wanted to kind of raise up a concern I had around the agenda item on civility. And I really want to actually read a quote, something that I've been doing research on since I read this on the agenda. And it's from Alex Zamalon. He's the director of African American Studies program at the University of Detroit. And he actually has a book written that is titled called Against Civility, the Hidden Racism in Our Obsession with Civility. And I just want to read a quote that he wrote from his book. Civility hasn't been the principle of the most successful anti-racist thinkers and movements who have sought to dismantle US racism. They have discovered over and over again that real change happens through direct struggle, without obligation to decorum or propriety. Creating real change requires us to confront unequal institutions rather than simply point out bad behavior. Disobeying unjust laws and taking disruptive action puts pressure on the levers of political, cultural, social, and economic power. And that pressure is what moves ruling elites to take notice and come to the table. And I just want to note that that is a quote that I feel really exemplifies how I feel about this conversation. It brings up a lot of big feelings for me as a person of color around what the implications are when we talk about a term like civility. And that's something that's, it's really disheartening to see that that is what's happening. Thank you.
Hello, Michelle MarquezMenegas again, and also speaking as myself today. And I want to speak on a couple of the items, but I'll follow up to Leslie's comments. So I completely understand the desire to create some norms and expectations across our district, the desire for respectful interactions. I know that there's a move by the California School Board Association and that we've had recent events in our district that highlight the need for some kind of response. However, I have some real serious concerns along the lines of what Leslie expressed. You know, who gets to define what is civil and what is not? And all too often that falls into the expectations that align with our white supremacist history in this country. And I think specifically about my experiences working in schools right here in our own district and having to learn myself that a student not looking me in the eye wasn't them being disrespectful. It was that in their culture, it would be very disrespectful to look me as an adult in charge in the eye. And so how can we guarantee that everyone who interacts with our kids is going to get all the knowledge and education on this that they need? Because we don't get that stuff now when we work in the schools. And like, so what's going to be the expectation and what's going to be the consequence? And I think on the second page, the very last paragraph, right, just reiterates things that are already established through our policies and practices and our handbooks and things like that, and very specific behaviors that are absolutely not okay. And so I would really welcome a conversation on how this could be a little bit different. Might I have just a moment to talk about one of the other items?
I'll give you one more minute.
Good, I don't even need that long, thank you. In terms of the, sorry, I'm gonna, meetings and notices, would just again reiterate the PAC, and now I will speak as the PAC's push that we've heard from families that we'd like board meetings to start at 6. And really encourage, the meetings may be held at school sites with the approval of majority of the board. Really encourage you guys to look into doing that this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I'll open it up for discussion. And we can go in order rather than discussing them all at once. How about board rule and procedure 9320, meetings and notices first? Any discussion? Or
am I clear that this, I was trying to figure out what the new version is, but does it move the time to 6? Is that the change?
No, it moves it to 5 is my understanding.
Wait, it's changing it from 6 to 5?
we have been since we returned to in-person, and I'm coming into, I mean, I've been here for, but my understanding is when we return to, or online, I can't remember the order. Does anyone at staff remember? But we have been meeting at 5, beginning our meetings at 5 since I've joined the board, and this codifies it. I think prior to the pandemic, they began in person at 6, and that was moved to 5 p.m. during the pandemic. Am I getting this correct?
Commissioner, one addition I would make is that during the pandemic, for several months, the meeting started at 3, and then I believe at 4, and then actually Mr. Steele is the authority here.
That is correct. Then they gradually went closer to the previous 6 o'clock, but we've been setting it at 5. Yeah.
So so prior to the pandemic, they had begun at 6 p.m., is that correct? When they were in person only. And so now we are, for the full board meetings, we are hybrid. So there is the opportunity to participate from home and also to comment from in those meetings, in the full board meetings beginning. And they are now starting at 5, as well as the in-person.
So what is the difference between the 2 different versions of 9320 that are here? I can't figure it out.
Does anyone?
I thought they were the same.
It's on page 3. There was one error that Chair Matamati, you actually caught. So the second revised version changes on the first line, starts to order, call the meeting to order no later than 6:10. And the revised version, there is a correction made to 5:10.
Okay, so that was just a technical correction of the, got it.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah, any further questions? I mean, guide me here, Commissioner Alexander.
Well, no, I'm just curious, I mean, what do we think about the meeting time? I mean, I've heard similar comments of like folks wanting to put it back at 6. And so it's sort of weird that we're being asked to codify something at 5 when we were, so I don't know, I guess, I don't know what our sense is of, there's the codification of it, but then there's the actual decision.
I think I've heard it both ways. I mean, now that we're hybrid, there's easier access from at home, which we never offered before. So there was the argument that now people can, from the leisure of their home per se, tune in and tune out as needed. And so there's that flexibility afforded, especially during the full board meetings where they can still fully participate and comment equal time. This also includes equal time provision for hybrid. And frankly, I think part of the thinking is, as commissioners, our meetings go well into the night, and we're already holding the public often after our committed upon 10 p.m. time. And so if we were to begin at 6 p.m., at least under the current structure and time that our meetings take, it would also prohibit participation from many families. Yeah, so I think that was the thinking behind the change. So in which case, at this, I mean, this is, so it is an action item. We can have fuller discussion, or we can move to approve or move to make amendment. Any thoughts, Commissioner Weissman-Ward?
I mean, I have thoughts. I don't know how clear they are. I mean, I think it's a hard one because I think that there are pros and cons to starting at 5 and to starting at 6. And so I think it's, under the way the current meetings go, it seems like more people would be precluded from engaging in the meeting if it started at 6 because of how late they're going. Of course, that's something that I hope that we will work on as well for our benefit and for the public's as well. But until and unless that is adjusted, it seems like the earlier start time. To be clear, I haven't done a poll of folks, so let me not say what I think, because it seems like it could be beneficial or not in both circumstances. So I'm not being very helpful in terms of my thoughts.
So here's where I'm at. I would move to approve and bring it back to the full board for consideration. And I certainly would be open when we get to the point where our meetings are, I was going to use the word sane, as far as the time and the amount of commitment is, but as they are regularly moving beyond the 10 p.m. timeframe, which is also codified in here, that we have to at least be conscious of the fact that, and vote to go past our 10 p.m. Limit. I mean, that's a 5-hour meeting that we're essentially regularly entertaining, followed by a closed session. So I would move to approve and encourage the board to get to a place where our agendas are more manageable and that we can therefore more fully accommodate public participation.
Yeah, and for the public's knowledge, if anyone's watching this, we have a plan to do that. We're actually beginning that process. So it's not just words, we actually are working on it.
Do I have a motion to move to approve it?
I'm fine with that if you all are fine to move it forward.
Second,
Second.
roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Wiseman-Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Matamidi,
Yes.
Commissioner Alexander.
Yes.
3 yes.
So now moving on to Board Rule Procedure 9323, meeting conduct. Any discussion from commissioners?
I have a proposed amendment around, it's really small, but it's around the speaker card point on the bottom of the first page, bullet point 1, where in the new language it says this language is moved from somewhere else, so I think it was in there before, something similar. Each person requesting to address the board shall complete a speaker card at the meeting and prior to the item being called. I was wondering, or I'd like to propose that we add immediately after the item being called. So it would say, each person requesting to address the board shall complete a speaker card at the meeting and prior to or immediately after the item being called. And the reason for that is that I think a lot of times, especially when there's a longer meeting, people come in late and they're not tracking exactly when things are happening. And I've seen this happen where an item gets called and then somebody's like, oh, I wanted to speak on that. And so then they're told, oh, you can't because we already called the item. And so I think just to have a moment when the item's called, for not to say that they can come 5 minutes later, but right as it's called, if somebody brings up a card, I think they should. And again, not that we can't limit time, right? I'm not saying we have infinite numbers of speakers, but they should at least be able to put their card in. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, Mr. Seal.
I'm just curious, as like, how do we determine what immediately after is? Because people are, it's going to be hard to, what point do we not take it? That's my only concern.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I would like to hear your thoughts on this. I guess my intention in it would just be, I've seen this happen where I feel like it creates this weird situation where people get really frustrated unnecessarily. And it's like, maybe we are having 10 minutes for public comment and there was only 5 people speaking, and then they come up and they're like, so I think that was just to not have the situation where we're being super strict about that time when it doesn't even matter, really. And then it just is really off-putting to the people in the public. But I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
No, I agree. I agree with what you just said. I just think it'll also create, or could potentially create, some conflict on at what point we would decide to stop taking them too. You could say, I mean, maybe if we put like 2 minutes after the item started, or just, because then it's still gray area, or it creates a gray area that could be, the public could be like, well, you took theirs, but you didn't take mine, that type of thing.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Like, or I don't know if we want to.
I mean, I just think putting something concrete in is what I'm suggesting. It doesn't really make any difference to like for how long for me. Yeah.
Deputy Superintendent Lee.
Thanks, Commissioner. I might just make one observation, and this is me stepping out of my lane for sure, but I believe that part of the intention, the practical effect of knowing how many speakers there are on a given item is for the chair or whoever's presiding over the meeting to gauge how much time to allot to each speaker in the queue. So if that's a moving target, if the size of the queue is fluctuating once that determination has been made by the commissioner presiding over the meeting, that in certain circumstances, that might be a little awkward. That's just an observation.
Yeah, no, I totally get it, and I get, well, I haven't sat as board president, but I've seen the challenge of doing that, and so I'm not, I guess I just was, and I guess my intention also would be if somebody comes in at the last minute and gives in a card, and there's already 15 cards, and there's 5 minutes for public comment, they don't get to speak. But it's more just like I was just trying to figure out how to do it in a way that didn't create that situation where it was like, oh, well, there's the rule, you can't speak even if there's time.
I have two suggestions that come to mind. One is at the Escutia table where we put out the print documents, that there's a sign that indicating please turn in your speaker card prior to the item being called, so it's signage there. And then at the beginning of our meetings, we can add a sentence letting the public know that speaker cards are due prior to the item being called. So please make it known if they wish to speak on an item prior to it being called.
I think that's helpful, but I don't know that solves the concern that Commissioner Alexander is raising, which is maybe focus on something else. Maybe you have kids, maybe you're texting, and not because you're being, not paying attention, but something else is up, and all of a sudden, oh no, this just got called. So if you're not following the agenda as closely as you might because you're really there for one item, it could I don't know that helps. But I wonder if there's a way, if we're adding in one line, which is, the president indicating, we will accept speaker cards for, 1 minute after the item's been called, or something like that. And then you call it and you give that warning, and
I'm fine with that.
I think that would address what I'm talking about. Because then also the president could even say that, like, here we're calling this item, you have 60 more seconds if you forgot to turn in your card. So it's like really clear to people. Yeah, that would be great if that works.
And you've already got the stopwatch, Judson.
Yeah. Yes, I have several, yeah.
With that, were there any additional amendments or questions? Okay, so I would suggest that we move the item with the modification to change in that first paragraph. So it's to replace prior to the item being called to at the meeting and within 1 minute after the item being called. Or we could, or
you could leave prior to, if you want to encourage, you could say prior to or within 1 minute. So we're still encouraging I think we should still say you should do it prior to. But
yeah, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So you leave the prior
At
to
the
in there.
meeting, yes, of course, at the meeting and prior to the item being called.
Or within 1 minute of it being called or something. It's awkward, but.
Okay.
Or prior to or within 1 minute of the item being called? Is that right?
Okay,
No, I don't
that's
know.
fine. Yeah, it's a little clunky, but I'm not.
Staff can clean it up
Yeah.
if you all want to.
Yeah, will you do that for us,
Like
please?
you get
so
the
we don't have to
notion.
do it. Okay, thank you.
We could also, there could be more discussion at the board meeting when you have to approve it too.
Okay, whoops. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
With that, all right. Are we ready to move it with giving the staff discretion to clean up the language and explain it when we get to the board meeting? Okay.
making a motion to do exactly that.
I'll second it.
Thank
Roll
you.
call,
So
please.
this is Board Policy 9223 as amended. Commissioner Wiseman Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Matomedy,
Yes.
Commissioner Alexander.
Yes.
3 ayes.
So now calling Board Policy 1313, civility. Anybody wishing to have some conversation about this?
Yes, so I would like to thank our public commenters, Leslie and Michelle, for raising what I think is a really important issue, and one that I wish I could say was front and center when I saw this, and then when you raised it up, it was like, yep, I see that. That is an issue and a concern in terms of sort of the Anglo-normative aspect of this word, the gendered normative of the aspect of this word. And I want to note, I think the intent behind this is really important. I think we do want to have meetings that feel like all folks can engage in a safe and respectful way. So I'm really, really supportive of the intent. And I'm wondering if we can take some time to think about the language that we use, the descriptions that we use, so that we can have a document with some, I think, really important shared norms about how we want to engage with one another in a way that is reflective and thoughtful and intentional and not inadvertently causing harm.
Yeah, I agree. And I did a Google search when the agenda came out and just looked at, and I found multiple articles. Because I had this thing, I was like, isn't civility a word that I was like, isn't that a word that some people it is taken in a certain way? And I found multiple articles. There's a really good piece from Learning for Justice from the Southern Poverty Law Center about it that's actually targeted for students that talks about the problematic use of the term civility. So I agree, and I think a different word would be important. And I also just, as we're having the conversation, if staff is taking this back, I want to flag the last paragraph, second to last? Sorry, not the last. The last paragraph's great. The second to last paragraph was one that concerned me, where it says, school community members shall not communicate or behave in a manner that causes disruption, hinders the orderly conduct of district operations, the educational program, or any other district program or activity. I mean, I thought about the teacher sleep-in, right? Which again, you know, we could talk about the thinking behind that, but I mean, we look, several of these articles on civility reference the lunch counter sit-ins, for example, and I'm just not sure. I mean, I understand that there, you know, when someone engages in civil disobedience, then there are consequences, but to me, that's not uncivil behavior. That's actually like very civil behavior, if we're going to use the word civil. So I just want to think about like how, like, disruption is a word that is in orderly conduct, or words that are also very open to interpretation. And I just think I want to be really careful about how we use them, right? And again, I know that we don't want people disrupting our meetings in disrespectful ways, but then sometimes civil disobedience is disruptive. And so anyway, just a thing to discuss more.
Yeah, I'm very appreciative also of the public comment on this, and I am 100% comfortable just holding this back. I think it's a good topic for our own discussions around governance and how we want to comport ourselves, because frankly, I think what our previous conversation that we just had about the length of our meetings is disrespectful.
Yeah.
Like, I think it is really disrespectful to the public and to staff, honestly, to hold them captive here twice a month. So there's elements in here that I would like to, if we're talking about civility in terms of respect, I think we have some work to do to also look at our own behavior and the norms that we're creating within the structures of our meetings. So I say we take this back and we have conversations around governance and how some of the concepts in here align with our values, and some of them are maybe not reflective of what we're going to ask our community to adhere to. So with that, we'll recommend holding this. All right. And I think that concludes our meeting. My first one, co-chairing.
Madam Chair?
Oh, yeah.
It's not.
Oh, do we have to vote on that?
It's not clear to me the action. Are you recommending that it be returned to the board with no recommendation, with a negative recommendation? I'm not hearing a positive
So
recommendation.
so I guess what are the options? Because right now, I guess it's not so much as I guess negative recommendation in the sense that I don't want it adopted in its current format, but I do think that there is good conversation to be had for, like a continuance or something.
I have a question.
I'm sorry. Yes, I was going to say I would defer to Mr. Steele, but I think your options are to return it to the board with no recommendation and an opportunity for discussion at that point, or with a negative recommendation if the committee feels that it cannot be adopted in this form. Mr. Steele, am I?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks. I stumbled upon a correct answer.
So we can't just like table it?
It's on your agenda for action, so.
Well, it seems if we want to have a conversation, if we don't, we're not in support of the current version, I would vote to send it back with a negative recommendation with instructions to continue to engage and talk about it.
And that is certainly one of the committee's options.
The alternative, I'm just going to put, there would be no recommendation in that we're conceptual, like we are supporting the concept of, I mean, I don't really care, to be honest.
Madam Chair, that is the other obvious. You
Yeah.
can return it with no recommendation. And again, the committee at the full board meeting will be reporting out the actions of the committee and certainly the committee's thinking on it.
Also, just to be clear, can I ask a question before we? So where did this come from? Because I wasn't clear on who proposed this.
Mr. Steele, do you know, or Deputy Superintendent? I don't know the history on this.
I do not.
I arrived with it having been referred, so I don't know what the backstory is.
Yeah, and it just showed up on the board agenda for first reading, but I thought maybe it came from legal, but I wasn't sure. I don't know.
All right, well, why don't we,
I mean, I'll make a move that if we have to take action, that we make a negative recommendation, and then we can figure out next steps, because I think that's fine. I think it's clear. I think we've been clear in this discussion, our intentions, and I think we already are having the conversation about board meetings, so we can also come up with a new version whenever we want. I mean, there's nothing stopping us from making a new policy.
okay, so at this point, so we would move it with a negative recommendation back to the board. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Great. On board policy 1313, civility with a negative recommendation, Commissioner Wiseman-Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Matamidi,
Yes.
Commissioner Alexander.
Yes.
3 ayes.
All right, so now, does that conclude the
Use the gavel.
rules? Okay, so I'm going to, 7:26, that was better than I was hoping for. So with that, we conclude the Rules, Policy, and Legislation Committee.